Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer the Chamber to my register of interests, which shows I am a member of Scotland's Tenants' Union, Living Rent, and of Acorn Community Union. Presiding Officer, I'm speaking today in support of the Labour motion that the Parliament agrees that Scotland is experiencing a housing emergency, as has been declared by Edinburgh Council and as I urge Dundee Council to declare. Because, Presiding Officer, there is a housing emergency in Scotland, and tenants are on the front line. And despite the rent freeze, Dundee has seen a shocking 17% rise in private rent prices. That's 5% more than the Scottish average because of loopholes in the legislation. In fact, property investors are describing the city as Scotland's buy-to-let capital. And property prices have shot up, driven by the potential to profit from a basic human right. This picture is mirrored across Scotland. Thousands of people in temporary accommodation, thousands on social housing waiting lists. And properties at or below the local housing allowance rate are scarce. And the private rental sector is capitalising on overwhelming demand for homes. Presiding Officer, this is an emergency, and it has been building for years. Members will remember when I brought the campaign for a rent freeze to this Parliament. They'll remember the Scottish Government's fierce opposition to the proposal, and they will remember how this government was forced to U-turn and introduce emergency legislation thanks to national public pressure from Scotland's tenants. That legislation should have seen us through to the promised national system of rent controls needed to bring rents down. Instead, more than a year later, as we approach the end of this temporary legislation, loopholes continue to be exploited, rents continue to rise, and rent control legislation is nowhere in sight. Tenants are facing persistent issues of mould, of cold, of damp, of disrepair, and of the constant possibility of being evicted so their landlord can sell, all while rents continue to rise. So how is this happening? Presiding Officer, we know that those in joint tenancies have faced unregulated rent increases when a flatmate leaves, as it's often considered to be a new lease. This loophole is resulting in a de facto eviction for remaining tenants who can't afford increases of hundreds of pounds a month. Landlords are also increasing prices dramatically for new lets to supposedly future-proof against the rent cap, causing spiralling rises in the market that we're seeing. This is pushing prices up, it's forcing overcrowding, worse living conditions, and increased commutes as people have to move further and further away from where their life is. We need measures that protect those in joint tenancies, that protect those in arrears, that protect those who are being priced out of their communities. Strong, long-term rent and eviction controls have the potential to protect those on the lowest incomes with the least ability to absorb extra costs and the highest risk of homelessness. And we need those rent controls now. Presiding Officer, we've heard this government making promises to tenants for years. We've seen the publication of consultations and strategies and commitments on housing. What we're missing is action. So I welcome the Minister for Tenants' Rights' commitment to the Housing Committee that the government will bridge the gap between the end of the emergency legislation and the introduction of longer-term rent control measures. But we've yet to hear how this will happen. And without this clarity, tenants are facing a cliff edge at the end of March, at which point there seems to be nothing to stop landlords hiking rents even higher. We need a rapid response to this emergency, one that's watertight, that's permanent, that's effective and transformative. But it begins by recognising the problem. We are in a housing emergency. Tenants are on the front line. If the Scottish Government refuses today to even acknowledge that, what faith can we possibly place in their ability to address it? So I urge all members, whatever their party, to support Labour's motion that the Parliament agrees that Scotland is experiencing a housing emergency. Thank you.